So remember to keep looking and don't go over the parts where you've circled to be highlights. Okay, now if your brush gets very wet, remember you need to use the cloth to dampen it out, whether that be a tissue or toilet paper or an old rag like mine. So how are you going? Good. You see she's marked out some of these areas here. Okay, now when you want to indicate fur, you can start using the very tip of your brush. So let's wash this brush off. Could you go and get some clean water, please? Let's wash this brush off. We'll use the rag to dampen it out. Get it nice and dry. Now use my water that's just a bit cleaner. Try and scrape all that water off and get this brush nice and dry. Get that rag to soak all of that up. And when you want to use your darkest black ink or your medium black, which I think is this one here, let's test it out. Okay. Now can you see how I'm using just the tip of the brush? So I'm not pushing the brush down hard like that because that makes a very wide line. If I use just the tip of the brush and press very softly, see how it makes a very fine line just using the tip. Okay, and we're getting some nice marks that look a bit like fur just there. So we're going to get our dark grey and start marking in some of these finer lines around the chest, around the nose, and around the face as well. So here's the chest here, and the chest fur puffs out. And remember, you're touching just the tip of the brush. Okay, so we're going to get some very fine lines in here next to the side of the nose. So even with this fatter brush, if you just press very lightly and very controlled hands, you can get some very fine lines. Also up here in the brow. Okay. And your other option is, of course, to use a much finer brush. So let's do some of those lines. I'll get year 5 to continue. In here, down here, and along there in the paws, and over here, around where that tummy part comes towards this front leg. So all along there. Now might be a good time to change your water over if it's getting very dirty. That's looking good. Looking great. So you need to capture some of the detail here in the back. So this is the chest of the bunny along here. If you have a look where the chest of the bunny has this white fur that's folding, and in here is a crease. We can't see what's going on down in here, but we need to paint the fur that's coming up to this bunny's side and towards the bunny's back. Also some of the fur that's coming around here behind on the side of the hind leg. Good, nice detail. I would probably put a little bit more detail in here. So this is the bunny's face here, but the fur is folding over, and underneath, behind, we can't see what's happening with the bunny's neck, but this is where the bunny's chest comes out from underneath the face. So remember to press nice and finely. So this is the bunny's face here, and then underneath is the chest that's coming out. And I would say that you could probably go around the side of the face here. See here where we're creating the form here. Now the way you move your brush around the page is important as getting the right tone. So if I was painting this fur here, I would be going in this direction. If I was painting these tiny little whiskery furs on the side of the bunny's face, I would be going in this direction with my brush. Underneath on the chest here is where I'd be going down and curved, a little bit of a curve around. Brush marks help indicate form as well as ink tonal variation. And by using a wet brush that's also clean, you can help blend in some darker form to some of the lighter form as well if you want it more subtle and you don't want to see some of the brush marks. So I would say all of this here could go a lot darker, as in the original bunny. If we look at the bunny, there's lots of brown, dark fur, almost black fur around the eye and around the side of the face, all into this cheek area here. Okay, and I'd go up into the ear here where it's much darker. In there and on this side as well, because remember this is our dark side. This is where our shadow is, so this is the dark side of our object. In this case, it's a bunny. I would also do in the light marks in here in the feet. They're sort of a medium or a dark grey tone, so not your blackest, but where the paws come around. No, they're like a backwards C shape. So they're not exactly a straight line, they're curved to indicate that the bunny's paws are curved. Good. Now I think this face is looking a little cranky, and I think that's because your lines are coming straight out instead of going in that little valley shape underneath straight away. Yeah, it's changed it already, I think. Well done. And I think this side of the face is even darker as well. If we have a look. Now I think you're ready to go in where your darkest marks are. So this is your pure black ink. So this is ink with no water mixed in, and this is that ink in here. So the darkest marks are just little marks. Don't be tempted to colour in, we're shading. Around the back here in that elongated S shape. Behind here where the back of the tail is. Underneath here where that crease is, where the hind leg folds over the top of the bunny's back paw. Tiny little feathery brush strokes in here where the bunny's back and side crease in at this fold of fur here halfway down the bunny. Here where the ears are, just here at the top of the head. So just go lightly and sparingly with your black ink on the side of the bunny's face and in between the bunny's front paws as well. So remember to go lightly with your brush. If you press hard, you will get big, thick lines. You want to get nice thin lines by pressing very lightly. Now this brush has a lot of water on it. So if you've got a lot of water and your ink's not looking very dark, you need to rub it all over your blotting cloth, your rag. And you come in with your pure black ink and paint very fine lines. Good. It's really taking shape now. So I think this crease that's in here, and goes along behind that back paw. Very finely with your brush. Yep, very lightly. Well done. You keep looking up at the original artwork. Just light strokes with this very dark ink is good. Would you like some more ink? Yeah. I'll leave the bunny picture sitting here while I refill ink. So whilst you're filling in your darkest marks, just be very careful not to go too crazy with the darkest ink, because you don't want to undo the beautiful other grey tones that you've worked on already. So the blackest marks really are just in here. Just in these areas here, around this side of the face, and they're very sparse, so just use the point of your brush. If you have some thicker areas, just be very careful if you get water on it, not to let it bleed. Now if your brush separates like this as you're using it, and you don't want those feathery kind of brush strokes, you can always just use your fingers to grab the tips of the brush and smooth it back into a nice pointed shape. Sometimes if you give it a flick while it has water on it and then dry off the dampness, can help get that lovely point back into your brush. So remember to vary your brush strokes a little bit. So you want some feathery strokes where you can see fur coming into your work, and then you want some more blended, bolder shapes where you've pressed a bit harder with the brush. A good artwork that has a little bit of 3 dimensions showing in it allows the lightest parts of your work to be so bright and so different to the darkest parts. So you want the darkest parts of your work to be super dark, and you want the lightest parts of your work to be very light, and then have all those lovely grey tones in between. Vary the direction of your brush strokes and vary the kind of brush stroke you do. So some of the brush strokes will be very blended, where you can't see one tone blending into another, and some brush strokes will be very fine, where you can see little things like little furry marks or lines that indicate the cheeks and the nose. Let's focus on Molly's work here for a moment. Good. Let's go back into this and have a look at what you're up to. Move it over. So now you can move your work into the looking good. I think you need some more pale grey tones in here. Just let that dry off a bit if it's a bit wet. Well done. Looking gorgeous. Now when you feel that you've got enough of your tonal values in there, you could probably just finish off by doing some of more very pale grey shading. So that's a lot of water with a tiny bit of ink into some of these, finish off some of these furry areas. Remember to vary the shape of your lines so that it goes around to follow the shape that you're indicating of the bunny. And this looks like you've outlined it, so do a very pale grey to try and blend that in a bit. Now the next thing you'll want is some pink ink or even some pink pencils to go into the nose and the paws, so the nose and the paws, and just go around some of those lines that you've got to show where the pink is in our original bunny. See that pink little nose and the pink paws? So we're going to use a Graphitint pencil. When you're ready there, Year 5. Now, I would say that Year 5 are missing their eyes. So I would clean the brush off nicely, get it lovely and dry, and then use your pure black ink. Good. Now remember to do some highlights in the bunny's eyes. So we've got some white parts in the bunny's eyes that you want to leave white, and also the fur around that eyeball there is quite white. So if you have a look in there, see how I haven't just filled the whole lot in. Year 5 have done theirs as well. And I would say use a very fine brush to do the bunny's nose as well. And then fill in those pink bits that we talked about. Then I'd say you're almost finished. You could round out this fur here on the edge a bit.
Different colour.
light dark grey, yep. Just test it out onto your piece of paper if you've forgotten.
Dark or light?
Dark, but you want to press very lightly with your brush though. Good, nice detail. You could probably put some furry bits into the ears there as well. Well, you can see this here. Don't be too tempted to outline because then it starts to look like a colouring in. Try and keep your lines varied a little bit. So I would just try and balance that out now by going much thinner there. Much thinner. Probably a bit too late, but much thicker here. So thinner on this side, on the left-hand side of what we're seeing of the bunny's ears, and thicker on the right-hand side, just to balance it out, to make it look like the bunny's twitching the ears forward, and we can see the inner part of the ear, and then some furry bits at the front there. I'd say, yes, that's good, but I would use your dark grey, so not your pure black ink. Remember to dry your brush off every time you wash it off. So where you're painting now, that's the inner part of this ear here, the inner part. So I'd dampen your brush off a little bit. And use a very pale grey. Just test that out. Just blend that in a little bit. Okay, now I dry your brush off. Get the black ink very lightly onto your brush. So just scrape some of that ink that you've got on there. Scrape it off. And just use the tip of your brush just to go around the nose to do the detail, the very fine detail black line. So not the pink lines, the black lines. Good. Let's have a look at that bunny's nose. Well done. I'd say there's a tiny little bit of light grey shading just here. Light grey shading. So I'd wash your brush out and then just use whatever ink is left on the brush. Water's left on the brush to spread some of that ink out. Now, time for the pink pencil. Ooh, just lightly with the pencil. This pencil is actually a bit like a watercolour pencil. And a little bit into the nose. And you can do a little bit of colour, not in the white parts of the eyes, just on the side. On the side and the tops. Okay, now clean your brush off completely. I'll do that a little bit on that back paw as well. Clean your brush off completely. And just use the tip of the brush to go into where you've drawn those lines and just go over the top of them with a little bit of a wet brush. Make sure the brush is completely clean, so no ink left on it, just water, just a tiny bit of water. A bit damp, but not dripping. Good, that's the way, with a nice light touch. Make sure you've got enough water on the brush. So if you've got pink ink, this is what you'd be using now. Now, when you finish that, wash your brush off. And I would say we're missing a little bit of shading on Year 5's work. Here, a little bit of the lightest ink. Also, we're missing some of the darkest ink on this part. So there and around the side of the face here. So in here and around the side of the face there. So that would be the darkest grey. So just wet your brush off a little bit if it's a little bit too dark. Just balance that out a little bit by having just a little bit more dark in here as well. The composition of your work also matters. So when you do something on one part of the page, it changes what happens on the rest. Good. And just creeping up the ear a little bit. Just here, but not all the way. So don't be tempted to outline when you're painting, because it makes it look like a colouring in rather than a three-dimensional form. It's looking wonderful. I'll leave Year 5 to put the finishing touches on their work of our gorgeous bunny. Really amazing work. Well done. Thanks everyone for listening to another one of my videos. I know it was a long one, but I think good work is worth working hard for and spending a bit of time on. Bye, see you next time.